The average Westerner thinks that Islam is barbaric. They think it's backwards, stupid, immoral, and so forth. And on the other side, the average Muslim thinks that Westerners are the same things. Backwards, barbaric, immoral, and so forth. So how can two groups of people looking at the exact same situation have entirely different interpretations? Right now, I want to bring together those two extreme views, and I'm going to use the hijab as a way of explaining the differences between the two sides. If you're a Muslim watching this and you're like, man, those Westerners are so friggin' degenerate, like I just don't even want to deal with them, let me explain to you how we got to this point. So essentially in the West, we don't have a formal traditional religion. We kind of have the leftovers of Christianity, and that still shows through in a lot of our customs, in a lot of our behaviors, and the way we view morality. However, now we have this incoming, I guess you can call it a religion or ideology, and that's feminism. I really don't want to oversimplify this too much, but in essence, feminism, as it stands at the moment, teaches us that men are wrong, men are bad, men are trying to control women, and that women are oppressed by men and need to be freed away from that oppression. So essentially, everything that happens in the world, we're told to perceive this through that lens. That's how we're trained, right? When we're kids, we're watching TV, we're watching movies, we're going to school. The government's telling us all the same things. So we're getting a very definite message. So how does this apply to the hijab? Well, we are told in the West that hijab is a way of men oppressing women. So it's men trying to control women for their own benefit. I know that if you're Muslim and you're watching this, you're like, what? But whether you agree with this or not, this is how Westerners are trained, and this is how we tend to think of by default. Again, doesn't mean it's right or wrong, it just means that that's how we're trained to think. Now do remember that we're not taught about other parts of the world. We're not taught about other ways to think. We're taught that everyone else is wrong and we're right. That's really important to understand that. So if you're a Westerner and you're watching this, let me explain to you in the best way that I can Islam's explanation for dressing modestly. According to the Koran, men and women should both dress modestly. Women and men. Secondly, both women and men shouldn't look with intent at the opposite sex. So in Arabic, it roughly transfers into English as to lower one's gaze. And after trying to work out what that actually means, speaking to many Muslims, it seems to mean that don't look at somebody else with sexual intent or sexual desire. So it seems to be that both men and women have a responsibility to cover themselves up to try to prevent other people being tempted, while at the same time both men and women have the responsibility not to look and to objectify and sexualize other people. So it's like a double responsibility system, and everyone has the same responsibility. Now of course this is a theory of Islam as taught in the Quran. It doesn't mean that every society follows it the same way, and what you do see when you look at different Islamic societies is that they follow this in different ways to different levels. So you have some countries that follow this pretty damn close. And of course, within any given society, different individuals will follow these ideas more closely than others will. I don't want to oversimplify things again, but essentially under Islam, there's a belief that as humans, we're imperfect. We're wild animals, we have all these instincts, sexual desires, desires for food, desires for power, all this kind of stuff. And we need to be controlled, otherwise we're going to create a hell of a mess. Muslims believe that Allah wrote the Quran as like a guidance book, essentially, a how-to book, how to live a good life. You follow this, you'll live a good life, your society will work well, your family will work well, and you can have a long living civilization. And on some level, Islam has stood the test of time. So we know that there's some pearls of wisdom laced throughout this religion. Whereas Western individualism, Western feminism, this is a new thing, man. This is like, wow, we're actually trying to remove all culture entirely, rewrite it, and see what happens. We are literally in a real life, real time social experiment. We have actually kind of done this already last century with the communist movement. It kind of did the same thing. It tried to say that everything else we believed in the past was false, and that what really matters is money and how much money you have compared to other people. This was some seriously radical stuff, and of course it imploded spectacularly. It really fell on its own sword. And for me, it's fascinating to see real time how this new wave of rewriting of culture will turn out. Tell me what you think. Dressed modestly or not dressed modestly?